move on with our next fireside chat, and we're talking global sustainable supply chain with the Global Sustainable Supply Chain Lead at Zurich Insurance Company, Chris Minter, and our topic is how procurement can lead on net zero. So a warm welcome for Chris, please.
Thank you.
Okay, Chris. Well, let's start at the beginning and get a little bit of context, if I can first. Talk me through Zurich's approach to net zero. Give me some examples.
Sure. So our basic approach to net zero is that we have a commitment as a company to have a net zero business by 2050, but for own operations, which is our scope 1, scope 2, and those scope 3 categories that we deem in our direct control, we have a 2030 net zero goal. And our approach to achieving net zero will be to reduce our emissions first by 70%, and then we will use carbon removal to remove the residual balance, because in the time frame of 2030, we cannot effectively reduce all those emissions down to zero with current technologies. So as an example, to reduce our carbon footprint, we're deploying renewable energies. We are replacing our fleet of company cars and corporate vehicles with electric alternatives. We're changing the way that we do business travel. We're encouraging hybrid working practices, and we really have a comprehensive approach overall to reduce our emissions.
Yes, that's a pretty clear strategy from the off. But talk me through the journey, how it's been over the last 5 to 10 years and the progress that's been. It's the journey that I find fascinating at these events, because there are plenty of different people and organisations in this room at different levels of, I guess, net zero maturity and where they are on their strategy. So I love to learn about the journey and how that's gone over that period. How has it been for you? What have been the highlights? What have been the challenges? That's a multi-part question. I hate multi-part questions, but over to you.
Well, in terms of the journey, so that's a good way to describe it. I've worked in sustainability at Zurich for about 5 years now, but I've worked at Zurich for about 10 years or so. And even when I first started, not directly working in sustainability, but there was a clear corporate social responsibility strategy. There was an emerging climate change strategy, and really in 2019, we put together as a group our first sustainability commitments, our net zero roadmap, and some really specific targets and improvement actions in 2019. And then in 21, we accelerated for own operations, our net zero goals, and refocused things then. We also, as part of accelerating our net zero goal for own operations, we started on our carbon removal procurement. So we started signing pre-purchase agreements with early stage companies that have the ability to remove and store CO2 from the atmosphere for long periods of time. So it definitely has been a journey over multiple years with incremental improvements and additional steps. I guess the one thing I could add would be that from our supply chain, we also have targets for our supply chain. And we're basically expecting them to follow our lead and commit themselves to net zero. So we have targets for the percentage of our procurement spend that's with suppliers that have set their own science-based and have their own net zero targets.
Because what I'd like to look at really is it's very easy for all of us in this room to celebrate the obvious successes, the things that went well, the things you've got a lovely statistic to back up with. What is often interesting to know about is things that were challenging or you had to course correct on. Any examples you'd have there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, electric cars. So we thought it would be quite straightforward in many cases to electrify our fleet, and in markets like the UK, it is pretty straightforward. We have good tax incentives, we have a reasonable charging infrastructure, but compared to other countries who are way behind, even established economies like the US, in parts of the US, we will find it really challenging actually to deploy electric vehicles and replace diesel. So we've had to change our approach in some aspects to maybe use interim technologies like hybrid plug-in vehicles to replace pure diesel or petrol vehicles and adapt our approach over time. I would also say there's the whole criticism a couple of years ago of the carbon credits market really hit a peak, and it forced a lot of companies, including us, to look at what we were doing with carbon offsetting. Is it something we should continue with, and should we adapt our approach? And that was one of the reasons why we accelerated our efforts with carbon removal procurement, signing these early stage pre-purchase agreements with really innovative organizations.
Because that's really interesting, the interim solutions, because everyone is always striving for perfect. They would love to get to the perfect solution. Is that very much part of the strategy, thinking, well, we'd love to do this, but it's maybe not possible yet. What can we do in the meantime? Is that very much part of it?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's why we accelerated our net zero goal for own operations to 2030, because ideally we'd achieve net zero across our whole business before that, but it's not feasible with the current run rate. So we've taken the steps we can, the areas that we have in our control, and we aim to do what we can in those areas most effectively.
You touched on it there briefly, with, say, the comparison between the UK and the US with EVs. Just want to expand on that a little bit in terms of the challenges of having global strategies for an organisation the size of Zurich. How important for you is it to have a strategy that can adapt, be agile, I suppose, globally? Mm-hmm. And how do you go about forming one of those strategies when there's so many different things at play in different global regions?
Mm-hmm. So we do have a global approach. We're in hundreds of countries all around the world. We have local teams and businesses serving local markets, but our ambitions, the targets, they apply across our organisation, and that boundary has changed over time. So last year, for example, we entered the Indian market and have an insurance company now in India, and they will be onboarded into our sustainability program overall, but also our sustainable sourcing program. So we will get access to their supplier spend, benchmark their suppliers with them, incorporate their emissions into our footprint, and reassess our targets. So it's a constantly changing picture, and even the status of countries or the maturity of countries changes over time. So particularly with the US, where under the previous administration, the US was really a leader in climate. Lots of carbon removal technologies were starting off, particularly those that need significant amounts of investment. They were starting off in the US, or businesses were relocating because of the tremendous tax incentives and grants that were being made available. And it's almost certain, I think, that a lot of that is going to be unpicked and removed. So the maturity from a climate perspective of the US is probably going to take some backward steps, maybe. But I've also been surprised as well, because in Latin America, which maybe is a country that many people would say would be less mature from a sustainability perspective, we actually have some really leading examples in our organisation. So the team in Brazil, for example, are doing really fabulous work. They've just implemented an accreditation scheme for their suppliers that are involved in the claim supply chain. So if you've damaged your vehicle and it needs to be repaired, then they've introduced a sustainability program and accreditation program where suppliers will be rated by an external auditing firm and ranked according to their sustainability practices. So whether they're repairing, whether they're using reconditioned parts, the paint that they're using, which I was amazed at the progress that a relatively small business unit like Brazil had taken.
I love examples like that, because there's one thing having the wonderful overreaching strategy which covers everything, but when you see these smaller ideas that are coming through, is that something that's very much encouraged, that creativity and that innovation to come up with ideas which may only make a few percentage change, if that, within the wider organisation, but added together can create something bigger? Is that very much the culture and the approach?
Absolutely. So the sustainable sourcing program that we have now didn't start off with the structure and resources it has behind it to begin with. It started off just as a proactive effort from the UK procurement team, actually. The team in the UK saw an opportunity to work with social enterprises and incorporate social enterprises into their supply chain. And over time, we've just expanded the approach and got additional resources and support. So yeah, if it wasn't for that moment of spark, that moment of magic that happened in the UK, we probably wouldn't be where we are now.
Well, the title of this is How Procurement Can Lead on Net Zero. So let's, again, this expression I hate, circle back to the title. Sorry, I apologise. How do you feel procurement and supply chain operations can really take a lead within this area? What processes do you have in place? What strategies do you have in place to make sure those areas of the business can make a real contribution? Mm-hmm.
So our supply chain emissions are a significant part of our overall pot of emissions, and we have engagement programs with our suppliers. We've been a member of the CDP supply chain program for several years. We're regarded by CDP as a leader, and we have leadership status under their supplier engagement rating. We've been doing a lot of stuff for a long period of time, really driving the agenda with our suppliers. But because we're an insurance company, we insure the whole economy, businesses right across probably some of the organizations represented in this room. So our suppliers are often our clients, often companies that we have invested in as well. So we see that when we're driving engagement with our suppliers, they're also our customers, and we're having these circular conversations.
I do want to come to the room to questions in just a moment, but when you were talking about suppliers, how do you show leadership with them? As an organisation the size of Zurich, how do you show leadership with suppliers? Is it in training? Is it in other collaborations? How does that work?
Yeah, I'd say all of those things actually. So I think the one, we have a clear sustainability strategy ourselves, and we have our net zero goal for our own operations for 2030. I think that is already showing leadership. There are others that are moving away from or backing down on their ESG commitments and their particular climate targets, but we are not. We remain resolute. For us, climate change is a risk, and we're in the business of managing risk as an insurance company. So the risks are not going to change with different policies and government administrations. Climate is real, and climate risks are real, and therefore we need to react to them. So I guess our overall ambition, the strategies that we have, the targets that we have, show some ambition and aim to inspire suppliers. But I guess we have our Supply Code of Conduct, which is a basic instrument, but it sets out the clear expectations we have for our suppliers. We've been providing training for our suppliers. We invested in creating some online videos, some online training materials. For about 18 or so months recently, we partnered with a company called Normative, and we provided access to a free-of-charge carbon emissions calculator. And we've seen several suppliers actually measure their carbon emissions for the first time, even go on to set science-based targets approved by the Science Based Targets Initiative because of the resources, the tools, and training that we provided. So I think we're pretty proud at Zurich about the impact we've been able to have in these key areas, and they'll be featured in our next annual report that we publish in a few weeks' time.
I do want to get on to future plans and ambitions next, but let's cross to the room. Do we have any immediate questions for Chris from the room? Because we had more questions I could cope with last time. We do. We have one at the back. I'm going to jump down here. There we go. I had a moment of fear there that I'd jump off the stage, break my ankle, and that would be the most viewed part of this entire show. I'm going to have to go all the way around, aren't I? I'm sorry, I've lost you. There you are.
Hi, my name's Sophie. I work for a company called EcoAct, and I work with lots of my clients every day on supplier engagement programs. And they often put their suppliers into tiers. So, for example, based on maturity or based on how important they are as a customer, if you see a long-term relationship with them, etc. What strategies have you found to be most useful in terms of grouping your suppliers and then tailoring your engagement programs to be most impactful with them?
Mm-hmm. So we have a target as to the percentage of our procurement spend that's with suppliers that have their own science-based targets and net zero targets. And we've profiled our spend data to work out which suppliers have targets and which don't. So we're prioritizing our engagement based around that. And then even with the suppliers that haven't set targets, we've gone a little bit deeper to understand, is it that they don't have targets at all, they're completely new to climate, they have no strategy or approach, or whether they have an strategy and approach, but maybe it's not ambitious enough or aligned with the latest climate science. So I think that's basically how we've done it. Segmented our suppliers according to maturity and then focused our engagement with them. It's pretty pointless for us to talk to a supplier that has no means of calculating their carbon emissions or no awareness of climate change to ask them to participate in CDP. As an example, we need to take a few steps back and explain to them why climate's important for us as a company in the insurance sector, and therefore why it then needs to be important to them as a supplier to us.
Thank you, Chris. Any further questions? We have one more at the back there.
Hi, good afternoon. How do you work with other people within your sector to ensure that shared suppliers focus on the same goal rather than having 6 or 7 different targets?
Yeah, we do collaborate with others. So CDP actually do a pretty good job of this, particularly organising collaboration events organised around industries and also maturity level. So I collaborate a lot with probably some of you in the room from other banks and insurance companies because we do have fairly typical suppliers. You know, we share lots of the same suppliers. So definitely through the CDP working group, the financial services working group we collaborate with, but also other sustainability networks that we have in different countries.
Okay, thank you for that question. Final one from me really is a look to the future really. You say that you are sticking with the principles, sticking with the ambition. Where are things going over the next 12, 18 months, 5 years? What's the ambition? Where are things going next?
I guess if you'd have asked me that question a couple of weeks ago, I probably would have given you a different answer actually, because we were planning, we're deep into CSRD preparations, we were planning for CSDDD, and now with Omnibus, everything's up in the air again. So we've our plans have had to be readjusted. We're literally going through that at the moment, reassessing what's the best option for the group, what should we be doing for the different functions, mapping how these legislations are going to impact our organisation. But we are committed to the climate goals and ambitions that we have, so we will just be focusing on execution, and the rest I think will come together.
Yes, that news could have come at a slightly better time ahead of a sustainability-themed event, because a lot of people's plans are slightly up in the air, as you say. Well, thank you so much, Chris. Really enjoyed your company and your insights. So a round of applause for Chris Minter, please.
Thank you.